Dr. Montaigne here. Today I'm going to talk to you about the active versus passive voice. This is a very important grammatical concept for you to understand so that you have more control over your writing. Active voice has to do with the use of verbs in a sentence. A sentence is written in the active voice when the subject of the sentence performs the action and the person or thing performing the action is named before the verb. For example, my grandfather took me to my first horse show. Not, I was taken to my first horse show by my grandfather. This puts the subject in the upfront position and it actively uses the verb. Using fewer verbs is always better and much more clear than using more verbs in your writing. Here's another example. My mother taught me to fish almost before I learned to walk. Compared with the passive voice, I was taught to fish by my mother almost before I was taught to walk. You can see here that there are twice as many verbs. In other words, two verbs as opposed to one direct verb. Now you can see here that there are two clauses. So if there are more than one clause in the sentence, then there's going to be more than one sets of subjects and verbs. So my mother, subject verb, and then we have the second clause, I learned, subject verb. When you write in the active voice, sentences are typically shorter, clearer, and more powerful. And this is very important for you to do and have control over in your sentences. The standard is to write in the active voice whenever possible. It's always your first choice, and this is very important when you're doing academic writing as well as other types of writing. But especially in academic writing, it's always important to be as clear as possible in expressing the ideas that you're trying to get across. Some people get confused by verb tense. Active voice is not referring to verb tense. For example, the present tense is the clerk opens the mail. This is in the active voice. And this is the mail is opened by the clerk. That's the passive voice. But it has nothing to do whether it's present tense or past tense because we still have active voice here. The clerk opened the mail. This is in past tense, active, one verb. And here we have the mail was opened by the clerk in passive voice, but it's also past tense. So the tense doesn't have anything to do with it. You can write in active or passive voice in present tense or past tense. Sometimes you'll be asked to write in present tense. Sometimes you'll be asked to write in past tense. It depends on the purpose of your writing. Some academic writing is written in present tense and some is written in past tense. It's very difficult to write consistently in present tense because remember you have to have the same verb tense all the way through the same piece of writing. But some academic disciplines such as literary criticism call for you to write in the present tense. Most of what you'll be doing in science and in social sciences will probably be in past tense unless you are doing some literary criticism, which you may possibly do. Sometimes history is also written in present tense. This is something that you can look up on your own, either in a handbook or by Googling it. Sometimes you can use the passive voice, and sometimes in scientific writing you need to use the passive voice. I'll explain. When you choose to write in the passive voice, you are emphasizing the object of the sentence rather than the subject of the sentence. Most of the time you need to be emphasizing the subject. But scientific writing is a good example of writing in passive voice. If you have to write in third person, not in first person, sometimes you're forced into writing in passive voice, but it's not always your first choice. Always try to figure out how to write in active voice first. For example, the 3-inch incision is made right above the pubic bone. Plastic clips are used to clamp off blood vessels and minimize bleeding. The skin is folded back and secured with clamps. Next, the stomach muscle is cut at a 15-degree angle right top to bottom left. As you can see here, this is a description of surgery, and this does not name the actor who is doing it. It's just describing the action, and so passive voice is being used here. Is made rather than made. This is in the active voice. The doctor makes a 3-inch incision right above the pubic bone. He uses plastic clips to clamp off the blood vessels and minimize bleeding. He folds back the skin and secures it with clamps. Next, he cuts the stomach muscle at a 15-degree angle, right top to bottom left. So, here we have the doctor doing the action, and to avoid having to use he or she, this person decided just to use he, which has always been the standard in past centuries, just to use the he for the gender-neutral pronoun for a single person. But in academic writing, sometimes it is appropriate to use he or she, and I ask students to use he or she. But you can see that there are some issues that come up, like, do you use he or she? Do we know if it's the doctor is male or female? So you'll have to make a decision. But if you can figure out how to write in the active voice, do so. It's always your first choice. Here are some more examples. If the agent of action, the individual doing the action, is unknown or needs to remain a secret, you can write something like, it was reported that, or Unison Bank was robbed. News reporters protect sources this way. They also may not know who committed the action. So this is a case of when passive voice is used. A lot of times students see this a lot and think that that's the standard, but when you really should be writing an active voice instead of mimicking what you've heard or seen before. Sometimes a passive voice sentence will be shorter than an active voice one. If it helps clarify the sentence by writing in the passive voice, you may choose that option. For example, the interviewer was told to give interviewees an electric shock each time they smiled, or the designers of the study told the interviewer to give interviewees an electric shock each time they smiled. When I wrote my dissertation, my doctoral dissertation, I decided to write in third person, and so sometimes I had to be backed in a corner and use passive voice here and there. Okay, so that's today's lesson about the difference between active and passive voice, and I hope you learned something. Talk to you later.